So now after a restart, the setup of this server is nearly complete. Let's take a look at how far we've gotten so far. So you can see we're now able to connect to the Exchange Admin Center on this URL, ebcex2.exchangebootcamp.com/ECP, and we can look in the servers list. The second server is now installed with the mailbox and client access server roles. So what we need to do next is configure the client access server namespace, so the URLs for services such as Outlook Web App, ActiveSync, and Outlook Anywhere. And we'll also need to configure the Ssl certificate for this server. And we'll be using the same Ssl certificate from our first server and just exporting it and importing it into the new server. So first let's look at configuring all those URLs. Now, you remember from an earlier lesson we went through manually and we updated the OA virtual directories and the ActiveSync virtual directories using PowerShell. And that was a task that took a few minutes. Well, we don't actually have to repeat that. What we can do is use a script. So here is a script that I've written, a very simple script, and I'll share this script with you with a download link below the video. And all I'm doing is using two variables to set my internal and external URLs, which happen to be the same in my test lab environment. So you can just replace those with the URLs or the namespaces that you're using in your test lab. And then each of the PowerShell commands that we ran manually last time is just laid out here in the script. So you can see that if you were deploying multiple servers into your environment, taking the time to write a short script like this can really save you quite a lot of time in the long run. To run the script, we just need to use the Exchange Management Shell. I've saved the script file to the admin scripts folder on my server. And we can just begin by typing the part of the file name and pressing tab to autocomplete, and then run the script. Now you may see slightly different warnings here. This is actually the second time I've run the script, and a few of these virtual directories were already configured. But ultimately, when you get to the end there, as long as you don't see any errors, you can just quickly check if you like afterwards to verify that the changes were successful. So let's have a look at the OA virtual directory on this server. There we go, we can see that change was effective there. Okay, so let's move on to configuring the Ssl certificate. So here in the Exchange Admin Center, it really doesn't matter which server you're logged onto for this. You want to go to the Servers section and then Certificates. Here is the Ssl certificate I configured on that first Exchange server, and what I want to do is export that certificate. Now we need to provide a UNC path to export the file to, so I'm just going to export it across to my second server in the C drive in the admin folder, and we'll call it Exchange Certificate.pfx. And you need to give it a password. Choose something nice and strong there if you like. Let's have a look in Windows Explorer. And there is the exported certificate. So now that we have that exported certificate file, we can import it into the second Exchange server. So again, in the certificates section here, we just drop down and select our second server. We can see that it's only got its self-signed certificates currently installed, and we want to import an Exchange certificate, and we just need to provide the same UNC path as before. And also provide the password that you specified during the export. Now we can specify which servers we actually want to import to, so I'll just add my second server there. So using this same process, you can actually import this Exchange certificate to multiple servers at the same time. Again, that would save you time during a large server deployment. That import was successful, and now looking at the second Exchange server, you can see that the imported certificate has appeared. The status is valid, but it is currently assigned to no services. So let's go ahead and click Edit. And we want to assign it to the IIS, SMTP, IMAP and POP just for good measure. Click yes that we do want to overwrite the existing default SMTP certificate, that's fine. And that completes the setup of the Ssl certificate for that server. So let's just quickly recap what we've done so far. We had a single Exchange server that had been configured for a namespace in my test lab environment of mail.exchangebootcamp.com. So that's where clients would connect for Outlook, Outlook Web Access and so on. I've added a second Exchange server to the environment, and I've gone ahead and configured the namespaces and the Ssl certificate for that server. But for now, the clients will still continue to connect only to that first Exchange server, because that is where the DNS record for mail.exchangebootcamp.com is currently pointing. Now, because this is a lesson in high availability, what we really want to do is distribute the load across both servers and do it in such a way that if one server was to fail, the clients would be able to connect to the other server and continue accessing their mailboxes. Now, the cheapest and simplest way to do this is through Dns Round Robin. This is nice and simple to set up, especially in a test lab environment. Doesn't require installing any additional Windows components, any additional hardware or virtual load balancers. And because of the client access architecture in Exchange Server 2013, this actually will work fine. It's not as robust and feature rich as a full-blown load balancer might be, but for the purposes of this demonstration, and even in low-end production environments or smaller production environments, DNS Round Robin is a perfectly valid solution. So if I want to make a DNS change, I'll log on here to my domain controller, open up the DNS console. So here's my exchangebootcamp.com zone. You can see I've got one A record pointing to the IP address of my first Exchange server, one A record for mail. So for DNS Round Robin, all we need to do is add a second A record of the same name pointing to the IP address of the second Exchange server. And it's really as simple as that. We've set up now a basic DNS Round Robin for the mail.exchangebootcamp.com DNS name, pointing to the two IP addresses of our client access servers. So let's try and test our client access server high availability configuration and see if we can get that DNS Round Robin to kick in. So what I've got here is Outlook connected to Alan Reed's mailbox. And in this command prompt window, I've used netstat to show all of my connections to port 443. So remember that Outlook connects to Exchange 2013 over HTTPS only. And the IP address it's connected to is 192.168.0.33, which is my second Exchange server. Now, it's important in this particular demonstration that I be connected to that second Exchange server because I haven't actually got my mailbox databases replicating on both servers at the moment. They're only hosted on the first server. So if I'm going to initiate a server failure to test client access availability, I still need those databases to be available. So I can only do this failure test if my Outlook client happens to be connected to my second server at this time. Now later on, when we have everything configured in a database availability group, it really won't matter which server we initiate a failure on at any given time. We should expect all services to be able to fail over and stay online. But just at this stage, when we've only got the client access servers configured, this requirement exists. And we can also use the Outlook connection status box here to watch what happens. So in effect, what I want to do is just kill this server on 192.168.0.33 and see how Outlook reacts. Now to do that, I'm just going to open my Hyper-V Manager. Here is that second server. And I'm just going to turn it off, which is the same as basically pulling the power on the machine. So it's gone offline straight away. Let's jump back to the client and we'll see how that reacts. And we'll keep an eye on two things. We've got the Outlook connection status up here, and we've also got our connection status displaying at the bottom of the Outlook window here. So after a few seconds, we see these connection statuses change. They've gone back to an established connection. Still says we're connected down here. And let's have a look in netstat now and see which IP address we're actually connected to. Okay, we can see my client is now connected to 192.168.0.32, which is my first server, the one that's also hosting the databases. And in fact, the client here didn't really seem to notice anything at all. It is running in cached mode, which will mask a lot of network connectivity and latency type issues for the end user. And at the moment, everything's still working. So what happened there? Just to recap, my Outlook client was connected to Alan Reed's mailbox, and it was connected to the second server as far as client access servers go, 192.168.0.33. I initiated a failure of that server by simply powering it off. Within a few seconds, we saw that server being offline was detected by the Outlook client, and it was able to re-establish connections, which netstat now shows us are going to 192.168.0.32. And the Outlook client has remained connected. There was no pop-up dialogues or anything like that for the end user to indicate that there was a problem. Now in this relatively simple test lab environment, we're just using Dns Round Robin for that client access server high availability. And Dns Round Robin could work perfectly well for a lot of environments, particularly smaller ones, but in some cases, a hardware load balancer that is more robust and able to more intelligently detect server failures and reroute traffic may be more appropriate. So that's a business and technical decision that people need to make in the real world. But just be aware that in your test lab environment here, you have the freedom to try out Dns Round Robin, and even for your production environments, you may choose to implement Dns Round Robin as a very low cost way of providing Exchange server high availability for your client access servers.